Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Code with Italians. Today, after the DroidCon London break for the past couple of weeks, we are back. Oh yeah. So show off, show
Yeah,
off.
I'm on brand. I'm on brand.
We are here with I guess, an atypical kind of guest because I think it's the first time we have someone that is a journalist. So welcome, Mishaal. It's I've been following your work for a very long time. I really like it. As I was telling you before the stream, that's actually usually how I find out what Google is doing. So thank you.
I get that all the time, man. Yeah, you're welcome.
So, do you want to introduce yourself, explain what you do, where, and how people can find you?
So yeah, I'm Mishaal Rahman. As Sebastiano mentioned, I'm a journalist, so I'm not your typical guest on this show. But I do cover a lot of topics that are relevant, I think, to an Android app developer audience, including the one that we're going to be talking about today, which is about the project and the initiative that Google's working on to speed up SDK releases, which was actually announced very good timing last week during DroidCon London. So very good timing to have this coincide with that, which is totally coincidental, by the way, because we planned this months in advance.
Okay, so just before we get started, I think it's time for Ivan to do the Ivan thing, and then we can
Yes.
actually get into the action.
Let's do the event thing. So welcome everybody and thank you for being with us. I just dropped the link in the chat. If you have an Amazon Prime subscription, remember that you can support us for free. Just connect your Twitch account to your Amazon account and you will see a toggle that says free with Prime when you try to subscribe to our channel. You can do it every month. We get $1 or something, but we
We're rich.
we invest that dollar to make things like this, the keychain, or the new sticker. Carmen, I see you. I'm gonna be shipping the stickers this week. So we are selling stickers on the store. You can check, it's in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you are buying, the mix packet right now, we are gonna probably add a couple of these as well. We also have the pins, and we have this thing here. The slightly passive aggressive sticker that is also very sparkly. Look at this shiny thing.
I think that increments the Karen factor by like 100%.
Ouch. You can have it also as a t-shirt because fuck it. But if you want something a bit more, cute, there is also the plushie, the teddy bear that you can have with the t-shirt, and also there is the mug, because I think the mug is the perfect thing. It's Monday morning at 9 a.m. Oh, what do you have for stand up? And you're just drinking coffee like this with a very nice, this meeting could have been an email mug, and they will know. I think they will sense this shit is on Jira already. Why are we here? Can I go? And so yeah. Man, I really like
this sticker gets very, very personal for you, doesn't it?
Yeah, it gets very, very. You can relate very quickly. But jokes aside, thank you for being with us. So let's dive in. Mishaal, what are we talking about today?
So I'm already sharing my screen. I don't know if we want to go straight to that, but
Up to
just
you.
as a quick, let's just go straight to that because I have a few articles that dive into it on a high level.
Okay.
So can everyone see it
Yes,
right now?
it's visible to everyone now.
So last week at DroidCon London, Google announced that it is speeding up the number of SDK releases that it's doing. So I'm sure most of you are familiar that Google generally does once a year SDK releases. You have the big Android OS update, typically in Q3 of a given year, or like August, September, October. Android 15 was released in September, but Google is now this year starting to speed that up, and they're bringing Android 16 in Q2 of 2025 instead of Q3, so a couple of months earlier. And in terms of besides moving up that release date, nothing is changing in terms of what developers will actually have to do to prepare for it, because it'll include new APIs, app-basing behavior changes, UI changes, etc. And there's nothing really different in terms of Android 16 besides its move forward release date. But what is changing is that there will be a second SDK release in 2025 that will drop in Q4. And this will be a minor release that will only include new user-facing features and new APIs, but it will not include any backward compatibility changes. So there won't be anything requiring you to rebuild your app. There will only be optional APIs that you can use if you choose to add support for them early on. Or if not, you can just wait for the subsequent year's major OS version, which will incorporate any new APIs that Google is introducing in this minor SDK release. And I'm sure you may be wondering, first of all, what new APIs will be in this minor release? And second of all, how will this impact, your release schedule, or, whether or not you have to update your apps even earlier to meet Google Play's target API level requirements? Well, first of all, we don't know, because this release is coming next year, so we don't know what changes will be in there, what new APIs will be in there. But when I asked Xian Chow and Matthew McCullough on an interview, they mentioned that the reason we are moving to a faster release cycle is twofold. The first reason is not really directly relevant to app developers, but I think you're generally Android enthusiasts, so you might want to know, is that it allows OEMs and Android device makers to release devices earlier in the year with the latest version of Android. Because under the current release cycle, such as Android 15 releasing September, OEMs and device makers aren't able to launch their devices with that latest version until it's publicly available. So you wouldn't see devices with Android 15 until at the very least towards the end of the year or the beginning of the following year. But by moving this major release earlier in the year, you can have devices launching even earlier with that latest version. So as a good example, Google's own Pixel 9 device, that was announced in August, and it launched with Android 14 instead of Android 15, because Android 15 was not publicly available yet, and it wasn't ready at the time that Google was working on the Pixel 9 device. So by moving this major release device, this major release forward a few months, it'll give silicon vendors, OEMs, Google themselves more time to adapt and also have this major OS version ready for their latest devices. The second major version, go ahead.
No, I was wondering, so you get basically higher chances to have new devices for summer. Right?
Yes.
That could be an idea, right? After Google I/O, you get a few new devices.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Running the latest version instead of last year's release.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? The Google I/O, you show off some new cool things or whatever, and then the new OS comes out probably for I/O, probably a bit later, but maybe in July you get the new Samsung running the latest device. Why not?
We'll have to see, but yeah, hopefully it will have this major OS version be available more quickly on actual consumer hardware instead of having to wait like we currently do many months. The second issue that this faster release cycle is hoping to solve is much more relevant to app developers, and it's that, under the current once a year major SDK version bump, Google is kind of limited in how often it can put out new framework APIs and also fix issues with existing APIs. So let's say Google wants to introduce some new API that it can't roll out through Google Play Services or GMS or through a Project Mainline module. It has to be in the OS itself, such as, for example, Android 15, you have this new private space this private space feature that provides APIs for third-party launcher applications to integrate with. The thing about yearly release cycles is that once the cutoff happens, once the platform stability has happened, then Google can't introduce any changes until the next release, which is significantly slowing down the ability for them to push out, new useful features. And in the era of generative AI, which is actually exactly one reason why Google highlighted to me they want to do this, is they want to introduce new AI APIs, but also just other new APIs more quickly and more frequently throughout the year. So that's why we're going to have a major release, which is, as usual, just push forward a few months, and then a minor release in Q4 with only new APIs, so that you can try them out before, without having to wait for an entire year to see them in the next major release. So this timeline right here shows we're going to have 4 quarterly updates. We're having a 2.5 Q1, which is only features, that's only relevant to users. Then we have the major SDK release in 2.5 Q2 or Q2. That's Android 16. That'll include both behavior changes and new APIs and new features. And then we have another quarterly release in third quarter that's only for users. And then the quarterly Q4 release will have an SDK bump as well as new APIs, but no behavior changes.
So the Q1 and Q3 features are what are the pixel feature drops essentially, right?
Yes. Those Google has been doing these quarterly releases for years now for its own pixel features, but they have never typically included new APIs.
Mm-hmm.
So they've typically not been something you had to worry about as an app developer.
Yeah.
So this is not technically new for Google to do
Mm-hmm.
minor SDK releases in quarterly drops. The last time they did this was Android 12L,
Right.
which was in March of 2022. That was technically Android 12 QPR2. And then we had Android 8.1 before that. And then we had a couple of other point releases way back in the past. But the difference now is Google is kind of, saying they want to do this more frequently, and also codifying how this is going to happen moving forward.
But a stupid question: is this going to be only for pixels or for everybody? Is it going to be like because feature drops are non-existent on other manufacturers. I mean, you get the usual monthly security updates on Samsung, but you don't get, they are pretty consistent.
Yeah, that's not a bad question. That's actually it's a concern that I shared, and I asked, Xiang Chao and Matthew McCullough on my interview. The thing is, right now, it's mostly only Pixel devices that get Android quarterly platform releases or QPRs. Most other OEMs, Samsung, Xiaomi, etc., only merge the changes in the yearly update. So my question to them is, how do you ensure that there are enough devices out there running this Q4 minor release for it to be worth even maybe potentially releasing updates that include these new APIs? And their answer was that they are working with partners to ensure that they take up these quarterly updates. And the changes that Google has made to enable this faster release cycle should also hopefully enable OEMs to also roll out updates more quickly, which I can get into in a bit. Nice. So hopefully, yes, more OEMs will roll out updates with the Q4 changes and not just Google on Pixel phones. The other thing I wanted to mention is exactly how do you prepare for this update? The one big question I'm sure you might have is how will this impact the target API level requirements if there's going to be 2 SDK releases next year? The good news is that it won't. Google will still keep to its once a year increment of the target API level requirements. So I believe the current requirement as of August 31st is that your app has to target API level 34, which was last year's release. Next year, that will be incremented to 35. and then the year after that to 36. They won't include this new minor releases, these point releases at all. So you don't have to rebuild your app and use these new APIs because Google won't require them at all. And in fact, you're not even allowed to target these minor versions. There won't even be an ability to set your target SDK version to one of these minor releases. Speaking of which, the way that you'll be able to differentiate between a device running a major version versus a device running one of these minor releases is that you're probably familiar with the SDK integer constant, which currently for Android 15 returns 35 for the SDK version. There's going to be a new SDK minor int constant, which will return 0 when the build is not on a minor release, and it'll return 1 when you're on a minor release. So, for example, the Android 16 major release in Q2, the SDK int should be 36, and the SDK minor int should be 0. Whereas for the Q4 2025 release, you'll have those values be 36 and 1, respectively. But you won't have to check 2 different integers. Google said in their announcement that they're going to introduce a new constant that captures both the major and the minor SDK versions in a single value. So it'll likely say 36.0, 36.1, and that's the only thing you'll have to check going forward. But they haven't released any details on this new constant, from what I can see.
So a question on this: which cases would you need to check both of them? Because I think from an app's perspective, for what I understand, you either only keep checking the major as you're doing today and simply don't take advantage of the new stuff that comes in the minor release, or you check the major and the minor because you want to adopt the new features or the new APIs 6 months in advance. Is that correct?
I think you would just check it if you're interested in verifying the availability of a certain API. If there's no other method to check if it's available or something like that.
I see, yeah. Okay.
And I think that covers the basics of what's changing. And the key things is there's not going to be any backward compatibility changes in this minor release. So it's totally optional to support the new APIs in this Q4 minor update. And I think that's something that a lot of developers were concerned about. Will there be any breaking changes? And the answer is no. There will not be any breaking changes in the Q4 minor release or any minor releases going forward.
But this is important, especially if you are like an indie dev, because everybody's always like, it's just a number in Gradle, bump it and YOLO. Is it though? Right? I mean, you can YOLO whatever you want, but it won't. It's not. It takes a bit of time if you want to do it properly. So it's reassuring the fact that you don't have to do it twice a year now, kinda, right? I mean, hopefully it's gonna be something that, as Sebastiano said in the chat, you can ignore, or you can just bump it, and you have a guarantee that it won't break too many things.
We'll have to see exactly what kinds of new APIs Google will be introducing. There were some people had brought up maybe the new APIs that they introduced could be a hint of things that could become requirements in a future release of Android. So, we don't know exactly what Google will be introducing in the Q4 release. But I think it's at least worth looking at the new APIs that they introduce, even if you don't plan to incorporate them or support them, just to see what might be coming in the future.
It's coming, yeah.
Yeah.
That's definitely useful, like a sneak peek in the future. Like, at least, if you're interested, you can start a bit ahead, making some Christmas coding, and then in January you are ready to go with the new stuff.
Okay, so in order for Google to do this, moving up the release date was not a trivial change. It wasn't
I can
something
imagine.
that, yeah, moving
There's-
up a major release by a few months is not something that you could do without some major changes. And
I would expect this also as like a big impact in the whole ecosystem, because you have technically
yes,
the 15 release is shorter than or rather the 16 release or whatever the next major version name or number is, has a shorter development cycle than the others because it's not a full year. But as you said, you just push forward by a couple of months or whatever.
right. And the big thing that Google wanted to ensure when it decided to switch to this faster release cycle is that to ensure stability, that even if we're releasing more minor releases and SDK version bumps, that the features that we're introducing are stable and ready for use by users as well as app developers. And the way it did this is basically to revamp the way that Google internally works on Android feature development. And so going to this page quickly, this is the release cycle for AOSP. This is the public AOSP release cycle. Google internally has its own branch of AOSP that it develops. So I don't know the full details because I don't work at Google. The thing that I know is, you have an internal AOSP main branch. Before this change, Google would create a new feature branch for quarterly platform releases. And all the features that are targeted for that QPR release would be developed in that branch. Or, for example, a branch for Android 15, the Android 15 dev branch, Android 14 dev branch. You would work on those features in that development branch. And then once feature development has finalized on that, you would merge those changes back into the internal AOSP main branch. And I think you can tell that, doing this, having the main branch diverge so much in terms of features from these feature branches would lead to challenges when you merge all these changes back to the massive code base that is AOSP. You would have conflicts, merge conflicts. You would have things breaking in terms of conflicting with other pieces of code because all the code was tested, all the features were tested on the code in that feature branch instead of the full AOSP main or Google main Android development branch. So from what my understanding is that Google is moving Android to a trunk-based development model where all developers on Android are working on a single internal Android main branch, and all changes are tested, all features are tested and worked on the same branch instead of having these separate feature branches and then merging them back into the main branch. And this is something that all other teams at Google, from my understanding, have already been doing. It's just that Android has been doing its own thing for such a long time that it's built up this, it's kind of just been the way it's been done for so long. And there's so many tools and build processes and habits and everything, so much legacy momentum behind the old system that it required significant reworking to shift to this trunk-based development model. And now that completed with the release of Android 14 QPR2 in March of this year. So Google has already fully shifted over Android to a trunk-based development model. And one of the major changes they had to do to enable this is to roll out a new feature flagging system called Aconfig, which I'm assuming stands for Android config. I don't know if that
maybe it's awesome
is the
config.
Actual but basically,
or is one of many. You never know.
Yeah,
right?
maybe there's big config coming at some point.
But basically,
there is a question from chat if you want.
oh sure.
They're asking why not keep rebasing on top of main.
I think,
because I guess that's what used to be the model.
yeah, I think that used to be That used to be generally the model.
It's just a lot
Yeah,
of
but
effort, I think, is the answer.
well, it's a
Yeah.
lot of conflict management. I mean,
Yeah.
I like this
I mean,
the trunk-based approach. It's nice and is been there for a while. But as you said, you need feature flags. So now I'm wondering how they doing it.
It's SVN with
Yes.
feature flags, essentially.
Yeah,
Back to
but
the
from a
good old
technical point,
days.
though, I'm thinking about libraries and things like that. I mean, I can do with apps, right? I know
Mhm.
how to do it with apps, so I have remote config, Firebase. Everything is fine. You have a bunch of if else, it works. But when you're developing libraries or like something like iOS, how do you do it?
Yeah. So yeah, this Aconfig model, this new feature flagging system that Google developed for Android, basically controls the availability of everything from now on. New user-facing features, behavior changes, bug fixes, APIs, almost anything is now flagged using this Aconfig model. And that allows Google to develop changes without impacting other parts of the code base. You can disable the flag until it's been fully tested, and then enable the flag once it's ready for release.
General public.
Yeah, general public. So the Google actually over the weekend published full documentation on its source.android.com website that explains its Aconfig system in detail. Prior to that,
Yes.
I was just going off of guesswork on how it worked because a lot of this documentation wasn't available.
So I can imagine we're like, oh, if only you published this a few weeks sooner.
Well, it's perfect timing for this session to talk about it now.
Yeah, that works.
So if you're interested in the nitty-gritty details, you can read on how this feature flagging system actually works. There are some pages on how to determine the flag usage and flag types. I'll talk about some. I'll give some examples of these flags. So there are two types of flags. There are Aconfig flags themselves, and there are build flags. And these Aconfig flags, as I just mentioned, separate unreleased code from released code. And they can be used to enable certain features within the Android framework or the Android OS itself. You have read-write flags that can be changed at runtime using the A flags command line interface. And then you have read-only flags that are constants that you can't change at runtime. And all user builds, production builds that you see on Pixel phones, everything, all these Aconfig flags are set to read-only, so you can't change them. But if you're developing from AOSP and you want to test these features, you can compile AOSP using the trunk staging configuration to enable all Aconfig flags to be read-write. And then you can play around, change these flags to see how they affect new features and new APIs and things like that. Then you have build time flags that cannot be modified at runtime. And you want to use these flags when you have some kind of pre-built or pre-compiled file or something that you want to include in the build, but you can't change them at runtime. So, for example, later on I'll show like an example of the emoji font file. This is a file that is pre-compiled and is loaded onto the Android system. It's not something you can change at runtime unless you were to include two different versions of the font file in the build, which would just increase the amount of storage taken up by the OS. So instead, you just have a build flag that determines which version of the emoji font file you want to be included in the OS. And this page documents how you can actually compile your own AOSP build using the launch command and also setting the flags to read only or read write. This, I don't know if you've compiled AOSP before, but a lot of this, like this part of the thing, might be familiar. This is the target. This is the build type.
Yep.
You have user debug and engineering, and then this is brand new. This tells you whether or not you are specifying the configuration of where all the Aconfig flags. So you have trunk stable, which is the basically all the things have been tested, and those are enabled for that particular branch in AOSP. Then you have trunk staging, which enables all the flags that Google is testing right now and plans to introduce in the next release of Android. So, are there any questions? I guess I'm not the best person to ask about this, but I'll try my best.
Not so far.
Okay.
I think it seems fairly straightforward so far. I
Yeah,
guess
I figured it wouldn't be that difficult to understand for,
yeah,
app developer audience.
we've all dealt with feature flags at some point.
Yeah.
I guess one question I have is the writable flags, Aconfig flags. Is there a way to set them in a user build? Can you only change them in like a user debug build, or how does that work?
You can change them in user builds if the flag is set to read write.
Yeah.
So it's based on the actual permission of the flag. So here's an example flag. This is set to read write.
Mhm.
So you would be able to change the state even in user builds. But the vast majority of flags are set to read only on user builds, so you wouldn't be able to do this.
And can you set the flags from I think the developer options?
No,
there
there's
used to be
currently
something.
only that's separate. So
Okay.
the feature flags menu. So this is kind of one thing that Aconfig solves is that there's like 10 different feature flagging systems that Android used before. You had system properties, which still exist.
Yeah.
You had device config. You have settings. You have the feature flags in settings, which is hard coded in settings itself. You have some feature flags in the launcher 3 for the launcher and the quick step, which is the recents menu and the navigation system. You had system UI flags. You had for Google Apps, you had phenotype. You had so many different systems. But Google, at least for Android features and AOSP, is unifying all of that to Aconfig. So it's just a single unified flagging system for features, APIs, behavior changes, bug fixes, everything that you want to control the release of.
Okay. And all of them are the flags are defined at build time. Is not something that the apps can also use. It's just for the system.
Right. Currently, I believe one of the pages mentions that only system applications are allowed to use Aconfig or are allowed to define Aconfig flags.
Okay.
That can be modified by, the CLI. But I don't know if there's any plans. There's probably not any plans to enable this for, regular Android applications, just because this is purely for the Android platform itself.
Yeah.
You have Firebase remote config. You have other flagging systems that you can use in your own apps.
Yeah, and apps have like a different million, like a million different ways of doing server flags.
Right. So just a quick example of some changes that Aconfig and this new trunk stable development has had on Android. So I don't know if you like Easter eggs, but Android 15 has an Easter egg, right? On the surface, it looks like it's the exact same as the Android 14 Easter egg, where you're this ship that flies around space and you land on celestial bodies. Well, Android 15 actually makes one slight change to this little game, and it's when you land on a planet in the Easter egg, you can actually plant a flag, as you can see here, this little flag. You plant a flag. And the thing is, as an homage to this new feature flagging system, as Dan Sandler on the System UI team pointed out, this new flagging system where you plant a flag on a planet is itself controlled by a feature flag. So there's a flag for a flag. And
nice.
And the flag is called flag.
Of course it is.
And the interesting thing about this is because of the way, source code releases happen now under trunk stable, normally, as I mentioned, you have the AOSP and you have the feature branch on separate branches. Normally, any changes that Google makes to features, you wouldn't see them publicly in AOSP website or the repository until Google does the big merge when they release a source code. But now, because Google does quarterly source code merges, this technically Android 15 change was already made public as far back as March. So this feature where you land on planets and you plant a flag was controlled by, as I mentioned, an Aconfig flag. But that flag is disabled in Android 14 QPR2, Android 14 QPR3, because it's an Android 15 feature, which you can see here. You can see in the release configuration for build AP3A, which is the build ID for Android 15, this flag is enabled by default, which is why if you compile AOSP using, based on the AP3A branch, this Easter egg change will be present. But if you compiled it in using an older release, such as Android 14 QPR3, the code for this feature would be present, but the flag would be disabled. So you would have to manually overwrite it, which is not even possible on user builds because it's a read-only flag. So it's a very simple example of an Aconfig flag. On the other hand, a build flag, as I mentioned, an example is the emoji font version. So you can see here, this is the build flag that determines the version of the emoji font file. It's currently set to 2.042. But there's a code change in AOSP that is in the process of being merged that updates Android to include the latest Unicode 16 emojis. And that is determined once the build flag is changed to 2.047, that will pull in the latest Unicode 16 emojis. So that's an example of build flags. This is not something that you would want to allow for runtime changes, which is why it's not under the Aconfig system. Instead, it's a build flag. There are a lot of other build flags, but most of them are not relevant at all to app developers. They're all related to the version of the NFC stack, the version of the SDK version, all things you set at the build and you never change.
Yeah, more like dependency version kind of thing.
Yeah, a lot of these are like that, where if you set a certain flag to true, for example, this is a new Apex module called Crash Recovery. It's currently set to false, so if you were to build AOSP with this flag as is, the Crash Recovery module would not be included in the build. But if you set it to true, it would be included.
Should I ask what that is? Do you know what that is?
Crash Recovery module. Right.
I think I wrote about it a while ago. I forgot what it is. There's a lot of stuff in here that is very under the hood.
I mean, you
AVF,
must be very
virtualization
happy.
Framework.
You must be very happy with all this stuff.
Oh yeah, it's very cool to see this, and
I guess it gives you one place to look at to find out what's happening, what's been worked on.
What's coming.
Well, I wish it were that easy because I don't have access to the source code, but yes.
Still, at least gives you clues, I guess.
Yeah. So that's the gist of trunk stable and Aconfig and build flags. I don't know if you have any questions. Once again, I'm not the guy who made all this stuff. I'm just figuring out by looking at whatever you guys at Google are releasing and figuring out how it works. Unfortunately, you have these official documentation pages now if you want to figure out more about how it works.
Yeah, I mean, there's it took me a second to understand what the icon next to the entries on the left-hand side was. And then I realized, it's new, or
new.
It's been updated, or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, it does say new if you over. I didn't even try that. Yeah, I mean, it seems fairly straightforward. I guess the question for this audience could be, like, we partially covered this already, but how much do they need to care, and what do you reckon? Like, is there any? Well, I guess not, because this is the first release of whatever that's coming. So there wouldn't be anything in the next SDK release, I guess. I'm still trying to wrap my head.
In terms of like how much direct impact this has on app developers, it's true that you don't really have to care about how this works under the hood. But like, for me personally, I think there's a lot of benefits in being able to understand what Google is working on before these changes happen.
Mm-hmm.
For example, one of the big changes, the big breaking changes in Android 15 is the edge-to-edge enforcement for applications. Google announced that. I think for many app developers, they probably didn't even know that was coming until Google I/O in May. Well, I published an article about that in the works in November of last year. So, like 7 months before Google announced it, I already had an idea of a big change that was happening in the next version of Android.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I can't confirm whether or not something is actually going to happen in the next release because plans change, or I can't predict exactly, but I think there are benefits to at least keeping up with some of the news to see, here's something I should pay attention for and keep an eye out in the future. I know all of you are already probably overwhelmed keeping up with the yearly releases as is, and I think a big part of that is just that a lot of these changes are kind of dumped on you guys at Google I/O. And yeah, I think at least keeping an open eye, an open ear to some of these changes, you won't be as surprised when they happen.
Yeah, and I guess, because right now I think what happens is we get the developer preview version of the next OS version, and that drops. I don't know, in the last few years, I think it's landed in like February, March, something like that. And that is when we find out what's going to happen and things. I think we get the big dump on the documentation and the preview SDK and all the stuff, and then devs have to figure out, test, see if that breaks any functionality in their app. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Maybe, I guess it really depends whether there are then multiple previews during the year. Maybe there are, I don't know. And that might actually give more time to react to changes, or rather have, I would imagine, given they haven't doubled the size of the Android team, it's probably the same amount of features. Instead of being shipped in one go, they're going to be shipped in multiple goes. So it might be more of a gradual influx of changes rather than. But then again, I really, I'm really.
Well, I will say that you can already see, because of this shift, this new development model, that it actually enables an increase in the number of features and APIs you can introduce, just because it makes it easier to develop new features and APIs in a more stable manner. Ensuring that things aren't breaking as much or having to spend time fixing regressions.
Yeah.
So I don't know actually if you will have the same number of APIs and changes just spread across 2 releases, or if there'll actually be more.
Yeah.
Because I just think this whole development model, of course, it's something that has been needed for a long time, but I think also will help Google to increase the number of features and also make them more stable when they do release them.
I mean, think about what happened with Java. So they went from, it took 20 years to get 8 versions. And now, they're releasing every few months because, Kotlin put a lot of pressure and Scala put a lot of pressure on the ecosystem. And now they are releasing new versions of Java. Now, like, Java 22 something, 21, 22. So that they are speeding up. I guess it's the same amount of people, but now you have a shorter iteration and development cycle, and then you can ship more stuff, right? I mean, it feels that you are shipping more stuff because you are constantly shipping new stuff. So you have that feeling like you can probably also get smaller chunks, smaller bites at things, and a bit you can iterate. At least that if you mess up something at the beginning of a year, you have like 3 more shots at fixing it. That's probably also psychologically interesting, from a development point of view, even if it's the same amount of people. When you know that you can ship more stuff, more frequently, I think you end up building things in a different way.
Yeah, and one of the things that Google Sion mentioned in his interview with me is that the new development model allows Google to, quote, experiment with long-term things that might take them 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or a couple of years, and add them to builds now without breaking existing functionality, because they can just hide them behind flags.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I want to go back to the Sebastian, you were saying something.
Yeah, just that there is a question in the chat.
What are the limitations of changes that can be shipped with Mainline?
With Project Mainline. So the limitation with Project Mainline is that you have to build off of, I don't know if let's see. System components. Let's see, there we go. So this is the documentation page for Project Mainline. So the thing with Project Mainline is Google is only able to ship updates to one of these existing modules, or they have to introduce a new one. So you have the list right here: ad services, ADB daemon, Android Health. This is Health Connect. For example, Android Health. This was introduced in Android version 14, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if Google wanted to introduce new Health Connect APIs through Project Mainline, they would only be able to do so on devices that are running Android 14 or later. But as you know, they also have the Health Connect Android application that's available on the Google Play Store.
Mm-hmm.
So they do have a way to introduce new Health Connect APIs on older versions of Android. But the same isn't true for all features. So, for example, the photo picker that Google introduced in Android 13, that was backported through Mainline to Android 11 later, because the photo picker is part of the media provider Mainline module. So Google was able to roll out in Google Play System Update that it included the photo picker on Android versions 11 and later. But as you know, they also introduced a backward compatible version of the photo picker through Google Play Services, which is not a Mainline module. So, there are some limitations to Mainline because, you have to have the Mainline module actually available on your device to push out an update to it. And, you can tell
you need to think ahead.
Yeah, this is something you need to think ahead for.
You need to prepare the ground to say, okay, maybe we will need it in a couple of years.
Next year we have Bluetooth 6,
Yeah.
we need to prepare for it or something.
I
know Bluetooth is already a module, but if you didn't have the Bluetooth module.
Yeah.
Zigbee.
You can use the same radio in many cases, so why not?
Okay. You can.
It would be cool.
Why not?
Yeah.
I don't think. Anyway, I want to go back for a moment to the feature flagging system, because we talked about read-write features or my flags. So, and you also say that system apps can read or probably manipulate. But I wonder if you could do it like on a specific type of build. You can do it from like a command line, like ADB. When you work with Firebase analytics, you can enable like a debug mode, and then they start. Boom, ciao.
Right here.
Thanks.
That was fast.
This is a CLI.
It looks like I'm doing this for like a decade, right? Okay. Okay, so.
But if you were to hook up your Pixel right now, the vast majority of flags are read-only, so you wouldn't be able to change them.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough.
Another caveat is that in order to even access this CLI, to use the CLI, you have to have super user permission.
Oh yeah, root
so you have to root your phone.
Yeah. We have Mike in the chat. He loves this stuff.
Or I guess you could also use a user debug build.
Yeah, if you had user debug build, then you would have ADB root.
Mhm.
Yeah, if you build the thing yourself, you can probably also create a menu somewhere to toggle the stuff. We were doing it too many years ago with Stefano.
Mhm.
Because I don't know if you know, but I wrote a book about this stuff. How you can customize Android, like cyanogen kind of stuff, right? That kind of
Back in my
the
day.
good old days where you were messing with the system because why not?
The build props.
Well, yeah. So we were messing with a lot of stuff, and I built the custom setting menu to enable our custom stuff on the build. So that's why I was wondering, yeah, if maybe you can do it from a command line if the build allows you. But if you're
Yes.
building it for yourself, you can do whatever you want. But
So what I'm
it's gonna be just you, not on your mom's phone, I guess.
right. What I'm highlighting right here, this is the build flag that determines the default permission of all Aconfig flags. So if you were to build AOSP and set this build flag to read write right here, then by default, the vast majority of Aconfig flags will be toggleable using the CLI.
Mhm.
But there are going to be some Aconfig flags that are hard coded to be read only. You would still have to go in through the list and override them. I don't know exactly which ones there are. It changes a lot. But yes, there is a way to
Makes
change
sense.
Aconfig flags.
Mhm.
Nice. Well, this is good. I mean, just because for the sake of talking about this thing, if the flag is off, you shouldn't turn it on because probably there is broken stuff behind. But
Yes.
I mean, but again, if you're looking for the Easter egg and you want the Easter egg 6 months in advance, you go for it.
Actually, is the flag read write or is it read only?
It's read only, but it's enabled by default.
Ah, what a
So you
missed
don't have to
opportunity
override
there. You could just play around with
True,
the
they
flag.
could make it. They could make it read write. There are very few Aconfig flags that are read write, even
Ah.
on user builds.
Yeah.
I believe related to the virtual device manager API, and I think that's it.
I have no idea what that API is, but
Oh, nice. But this is cool. I mean, the idea that they are constantly merging, I think it's, I want to say it's good for us in a way, but I'm more like I'm happy for them. No,
Yeah.
I'm serious. Come on, you know how bad
yeah.
it can be when you are like working on a gigantic code base and you are constantly and your work is fixing merge conflicts and you're like, yeah. So if developer happiness is a thing, when you
Yeah.
work and you are happy and you don't want to kill yourself every two 2 days, that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
I don't think it's about killing yourself. It's more about killing the person that keeps changing the code that you're
Well, I
also
mean,
touching. It's
yeah,
like,
depend.
"Ah!"
It depends where you want to go. I mean, if you're like an introvert or like an extrovert, you can aim the violence in a direction or another direction. I think that's a personal thing. It's a personal choice,
The
Sebastian.
key point is violence, though.
The big, I mean, isn't it always the solution to everything?
Isn't software engineering mostly about violence and restraint?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. You will probably be very, very angry all the time, but you are more like I don't know. You harness the violence and then you keep it. You control it's not that you are not a violent person. I mean, like, I know violence, but I control it. That's where the virtue is.
How can I be angry or violent when I have this guy?
Look at that thing. That's bad. That's the best.
I have the cousin up there, but it's the old school one. You have the newest and fanciest.
Yeah.
Well, this is good. This is good. What else? Any other question? Chat, any other question, Sebastiano?
Not for me, not really. It seems from users' perspective, it seems like a win. From dev's perspective, seems like a win. From AOSP perspective, also sounds like a win. So, yeah.
I mean, the chat they are pointing out that it's always gonna work if OEMs are in, but I think that they have been waiting for probably 10 years for this kind of stuff. I mean, imagine that you can have a conversation with Google because they want to move faster. So I think it's gonna be easier even to talk about this stuff, because that the next batch is coming in 3 months, right? So if you miss a window, because we all worked with deadlines and stuff like that. If you have like one deadline per year, it gets crazy at some point. But if you are just rolling with the punches, how is it in English? Like you just work out the pace and say, yeah, I mean, we missed the Q1, whatever, we'll be ready for Q2.
And yeah, Google told me that it's working with OEM and SoC partners to make sure they stick as closely as possible to trunk stable development models so they have less work cut out for them. As you know, OEMs heavily modify AOSP before shipping it on their devices, but this new development model could benefit them as well. If they were to use, instead of developing their own features the way they do now, which is rebasing on top of the main branch and then porting over the changes one by one and testing it against the main branch just as they do now, they could also follow the same Aconfig model. They can define their own flags. Yeah. They can use the same flagging system to test their own features, and hopefully it'll reduce the amount of time it takes for them to complete their own merge process, their rebasing process.
Mm-hmm. I guess a related question to this, I think you already mentioned this, but I don't remember. Can applications access the value of flags or even list them, or do you, because from the command line you mentioned you need root, but is there an API for this? And even do you care about, should you care?
No, I don't think you should care.
Okay.
I don't think there's any reason for apps to be accessing the values of Aconfig flags.
I don't think it's even possible. The Easter egg. I really want to see the Easter egg.
Just that's fine. Just run it on your phone now.
I mean, I can ship something to the Play Store that roots your phone, changes the flag, and now you have the Easter egg.
Would you also?
And then I get banned from the Play Store.
I was gonna say, do you also want to get someone's home banking details at that point? I mean, while you're at it, why not?
No.
Just monetize it.
Well, I mean, no, but I mean, my new flag. Okay, but from because we already discussed it. It doesn't make any sense from a developer point of view. Use this. Would it make sense? I mean, I guess if you have a build system.
I guess you only care if you're building AOSP.
The OS.
Yeah. These flags only control AOSP Android platform changes. Fair so there's enough. No reason for your there's only the changes that matter to your application are the ones that Google is actually releasing. Yeah, so you don't need to check for the flag, because the flag only is there to determine if a certain code is actually available or not. So here's an example that Google provides on how to actually use a config flag in an application. You wrap a code change. So you check the value of the flag, then you test some untested code. Else you just continue as though the untested code isn't present. But for app developers, you're never going to be testing AOSP untested code. You're only going to be testing any features that Google has deemed worthy releasing. Yeah. So there's no reason to check for the flag in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, you need to be working on some serious system app or OEM kind of stuff. If you're building a device that then is gonna use something that is gonna be on the next Android, so probably your life is already adventurous enough.
Can I bring your attention to the fact that there is a documentation page showing you how to use an if else?
Well, I
find it very cute.
Yeah, but there is also my new flag. That's also nice. I like it. And probably the page
the
generated by AI.
new question from the chat is remote flags in the future? I don't know. It seems like it feels like this stuff is mostly stuff you want to
builds.
change at build time.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that remote flags are already there. Like for sure.
I mean, I'm sure like Play Services has a way
Play
to do that.
Services is feature flagging everything probably.
Android has already supported, there's already a way for platform features to be controlled server side. You have the old device config API, and the Google Play Services app was set as the default device configurator. So it's allowed to use this API to remotely change features. And Google has used this a few times to control the rollout of certain features. See, off the top of my head, I think on Pixel devices, when you copy a text to the clipboard, you have this little clipboard overlay that shows up on the bottom left, right? You have buttons to share, you have a button to edit the text, and there's optionally a button to send that text or image to a nearby device using Quick Share.
Oh.
That last button, you might not see it because that's controlled by a server-side flag, the device config flag that Google's disabled. I don't know why they disabled it a long time ago, but they used to enable it in a while ago. But the flag is there, and that's something that Google Play Services can control remotely. But Google's getting rid of device config and replacing it with Aconfig, which I don't think has a way to remotely control it, or at least I don't think there's a way built into Google Play Services to actually access this API. But maybe they'll change it in the future.
Like only system apps can access this API. Well, the generated flags that we're seeing here. So, but I don't know if you know the answer, but I have a life cycle question about this. Do you know if whenever a flag is shipped or has been shipped for enough time, whatever that means, at some point the flag is removed and you just ship the new thing?
Good question. I don't think they've done that yet, just because the system is so new. They probably will. I know they do that a lot in the Chromium team. Does that a lot, where you have a flag for a new Chrome feature, Chrome OS feature. After like 6, 7, 8 releases later, they just remove the flag entirely because it's enabled by default.
It's just a cleanup ticket on.
Yeah,
I mean, that was the approach that we had.
You end up with,
you just change this right here. There's no longer if else statement. You just use the code.
Yeah, and then you probably clean up a bunch of nested if else's or like like you clean up the number of combinations that you have to keep maintaining as well.
It was just a hygiene kind of thing when we were doing feature flags in the apps. When we were adding a flag, and you will also add the ticket to actually remove the flag in 3 versions or whatever. So because you need to keep track of this stuff, especially with, I mean, this is a bit more hard coded when you are working with apps. The fact that you are shipping the code doesn't mean that the feature is enabled. So you have this discrepancy from a versioning point of view. Yeah, sure. The code was in 1.0, but the feature we enable it in 1.2. You start thinking how to keep track of this stuff, and I guess that they will have something similar to deal with, especially because there is versioning in the APIs and things like that. But I think it's not gonna be that brutal because they also have just one version per year, and now they have the minor version. Probably you will be able to do it without stress, but it's always a trade-off, right? You make it easy on one side, but now you have another thing to keep an eye on, like cleaning up stuff and bunch of if-else that you have everywhere.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions from the chat? I'll give you another minute. I'm gonna be counting. In the meantime, I know it's a weird question, but what's your favorite flag? Do you have a favorite flag? One that is like, oh, I see you being there. I want to know what you do.
I'm waiting.
I'm waiting. You're muted.
Oh, we can't hear you.
I'd say probably just flag. It just sounds. It's just so silly. You have, the Easter egg flag, and it enables it's a flag for a flag. What's better than that?
Yeah,
but I like
even the
I like
description
the
is something silly. It's flags are planted on planets when you land. Yes, it's a flag for flags.
Well, I like there is a package for Easter eggs that is called egg. You know what I mean? I hope it feels appropriate. Yeah.
this is all composed.
Oh yeah, here's
as
a
well,
here's a
I
good
think.
example of the if the flag is flag is set, then it paints the the flag when you land on the planet.
Yeah, I think it's nice.
Very simple, straightforward, but amusing use of Aconfig.
This is good, and I like that it's already there. People can look at it. You can. I don't know. It's nice that, as you say, instead of having like one gargantuan merge once a year where people just rush to understand, oh yeah, what's new? You have, small bites. You go there and you can definitely write more articles through the year. It's also good for you.
Yes, it is.
It's a win-win-win.
Everybody's happy, man. So I think, Sebastian, what do you think?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like we have any further questions from the chat, so I think we can start wrapping up.
Yeah. So thank you everybody for being with us. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. It's important for us, even if you're not monetizing anymore on YouTube. So there is that. If you want to support us, you can buy our swag on the coffee store. You can even become a coffee subscriber. We have a few tiers available. Just pick the one that fits your desired. And yeah, if you want stickers, just look on the store. If you want this specific message on a t-shirt or on a cap or on a teddy bear, check our merch site. And yeah, Sebastian, are we streaming next week?
No, we're not, because I'm on vacation finally. So
Fair enough.
We'll be back the week after that. But before we say what we're gonna do in 2 weeks, I think, Mishaal, you need to.
Oh yeah, do your thing. Do your thing,
Right.
Mishaal.
So I help run a podcast called Android Faithful. It's a weekly show where we cover the latest Android news. We talk about the latest apps, the latest news in the Android ecosystem, including Android platform news. Because if you don't follow me already, what I do a lot is I dig into the Android beta releases that Google puts out to figure out what's coming in the next major version. I know there's a lot of people at Google who don't like it or also like it, but they rely on it, and I just it's I love digging into Android, right? So if you want to find out what's happening in the next year's release or the year after, or some things that Google doesn't really tell you about, because there's so many features and changes in every Android release that is just impossible for them to put out in marketing. I love to dig into that stuff and figure out what goes into every Android release. So if you want to find out, I'm everywhere on like every social platform, Mastodon, Threads, etc. You can find the links on my link tree, and I also have my own Patreon that you can support if you want to join the Discord group that I run, where we talk about Android and pixels and all that jazz.
Cool.
Fantastic. Thank you. I just want to add a final thought. If you want to be in Milan in November for any peculiar reason, so 23 It's a Saturday.
Yeah.
Yes, there is DevFest Milan. So it's a Google event. It's free, and this is run by our friend Danielo. Hi, Danielo. And the week after, there is DroidCon Italy. So if you want to come, we will be there. I will be there. DevFest. Roberto is gonna be there at DevFest, and I guess all of us are gonna be at
All
DroidCon Italy.
the crew.
All all the Italian pizza, mandolino, and Android. We are gonna be there in Milan for a couple of days of madness as usual. So if you have still time, book a flight, book a hotel, get a ticket.
Yeah, we'll see you there. We'll have more stickers. And I mean, unless Ivan gives them all away in the meantime.
Plenty.
And so, yeah, for next week, I'm on vacation, so no stream. But the week after that, we are going to be here with Doris. Those of you who have been following us for a long time will have seen her before. Doris is working on the animations API in Compose. So there are a lot of animations. Yes, I'm actually very excited because I used some of the new APIs last week because I last minute thought, oh, I could add an animation to the talk I gave at DroidCon. And I was like, oh, this is actually cool.
This is working.
That was very fun, and I'm very excited to have Doris back again. I'm also a big fan of animations, so there's that.
Who isn't?
Okay, folks, thank you very much. Mishaal, thank you again for being with us. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for sharing all the information that I somehow don't get from my colleagues. And yeah, we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Have a great one, folks. Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.